welcome to another edition of Cooler Heads Prevail. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that's near and dear to both of our hearts, which is immigration, and it's actually a topic that's been very much in the news lately for one reason or another.
It has.
Just like we discussed a moment ago, Jim, if you want to start off with your questions to me, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Sure. First, do you believe that immigration is something that is necessary and helpful and a positive part of our society, our country?
Yes, it's very much in the American tradition. It's something that we should all be proud of.
Well, what about economically, though? Growth for our country, help our economy, help our nation as a whole be strong.
Oh, definitely.
Do you feel that the immigrants coming to our country are more likely to engage in crime and be criminal in nature?
Well, first of all, we need to make a sharp distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. Legal immigrants, there's no evidence to suggest that they're more involved in crime than anybody else.
How about illegal immigrants?
Illegal immigrants, there's a dynamic going on in there that really is in sore need of fixing, that has been broken for a long time, which is, let's say you come to this country, you cross the border illegally. Unfortunately, that puts you in the position of having to resort to further unlawful activity in order to support yourself. Let's say you just want to work hard, you want to make money, you want to send some money home. But in order to do that, you need to either obtain false documentation authorizing you to work or work for a company that hires illegal aliens. And you and I know that if they work for a company that hires illegal aliens, they're probably not very much more likely to honor other things like minimum wage, humane work conditions.
You treat the immigrants poorly.
Yes. Believe it or not, there is a compassionate case to be made for a strong border, but accompanied with as many avenues as possible for people to come into the country, either through a work visa or through other means.
Path to citizenship?
Path to citizenship, that's certainly all on the table. But like I said before, I think one of the essential things that we need to do at the beginning is prevent people from falling into that trap. Not to let it segue too much into sanctuary cities and sanctuary states at this point, but I think one of the fatal flaws with that stance is the fact that they're working to perpetuate a system that basically condemns anybody that comes into this country illegally to a life like that.
So what's going on right now is that people are presenting themselves at the border and are being taken into custody. I mean, they're not even, crossing in an open area or jumping a fence or going underneath one and seeking asylum because of what's happening in their countries, and they're being arrested, and the children have been taken away from their parents. I guess that's apparently stopped now, although they haven't been reunited yet. But they're looking to then just detain the families, the children and the parents all together, and detain them, even though they're seeking asylum, because they're saying they crossed illegally.
Well, if you have a border crossing, and if they're actually presenting themselves to an official at the border,
that's what's happening a lot of the time.
If they do not cross into the United States, there should be no reason to take them into custody, for one thing. And number two, if they're before an official at the border, they should have the opportunity at that point to say that they're seeking asylum. If anything, as I was alluding to before, what we should have is a secured border with as many opportunities as possible along that border to seek asylum, to perhaps even apply for a work visa if they want to. But simply to have them walk in, I think that would be a mistake, and I think that would be sending the wrong message.
Most of the people coming across, we're talking to Mexico, of course, are asylum seekers. I mean, there's also people who are looking to work, I'm sure, but a lot of them either are asylum seekers or claiming to seek asylum. And given the countries that they're coming from, there's bad stuff happening in their countries. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is quite legitimate, but to arrest them at that point, to detain them, and I guess their families as well, indefinitely, is, I don't think, the right way to go.
Well, I can only discuss my own opinion on that. And I really don't see any justification to hold somebody indefinitely, which is why, like I said, if you have a well-secured border where people only have the opportunity to at least try to enter into the United States at designated points, And then at that point, they can say, I'm seeking asylum, or I want to apply for a work visa, or for some other reason. Those are the things that we need to be talking about. To say that, going too far in the other direction, that it's a good idea to just have people be able to walk in, get whatever employment that they can, and condemn themselves to a life of being marginalized. I don't think that's the American way either. We need to find some kind of compromise.
Well, I agree with that, that having a path to citizenship is extremely important, would be very helpful. In fact, what the studies have shown, the research has shown, is that the better a country is, a better a system is at incorporating immigrants, the more rapidly they contribute to the economy, the society, and the
Right,
better off
if
everybody
they
is.
give the proper avenues. But I think, as I mentioned before, the whole concept of sanctuary cities sends really the wrong message. It's misguided, if you want
Well,
my honest
I
opinion.
think it's isn't quite what it sounds like. It's not like you can just show up at a city and you've got sanctuary. Local law enforcement and agencies are not doing the job of the federal immigration. That they may not be sharing information. They're not going to seek out somebody's immigration status. They're not going to ask them for it.
Well, you're right on that point. I don't think it's necessarily their job to apprehend someone that they believe is an illegal alien, but at the same time, if they have reason to believe, if they have someone in custody on other matters, that they're also of questionable legal status in this country, then I think, if anything, they should be working with ICE agents.
I think what they're doing mostly is treating people who come in just like any other person and not trying to distinguishing whether they're a citizen or a non-citizen.
Well, remember, like I said, if they have reason to believe that someone
Which
is
would
in this country illegally,
what would
then,
that reason be? It's an example of that.
well, if they're asked to present an identification and they don't have any,
Okay.
if they don't speak English, I think that's a good indicator.
That's kind of profiling, but
Once you have them in custody in other matters, I wouldn't call it profiling, as long as you have them in custody for justifiable reasons.
and I know that if you live in a place that's within 100 miles of the border, that ICE can simply ask for your papers. So I could be driving down the road, not bring my wallet, and be asked for my papers just because we're that close to a border. But they probably wouldn't because I do speak English. I do look like I belong. I think it's the sanctuary city thing is.
It's good-hearted but misguided. That's where I stand on it. And the thing that really annoys me about the news that's been coming out about ICE lately is how they've been treating families, how they've been treating children. Of course, that's important. We want to be humane. We don't want to send the message to the world that we treat people badly. But at the same time, the question that you have to ask when evaluating a situation like that is, are they operating in accordance with the law? Now, if the answer to that question is no, then you have a rogue agency that needs to be reined in.
And operating within the law and operating with being reasonable, courtesy, not being heavy-handed.
I wasn't quite finished with
Oh.
my point, though. Now, if the answer to that question I had before, are they operating in accordance with the law, is yes, then that should be a cue to our lawmakers that they need to change the law. And one thing that absolutely made my jaw hit the floor was when I was watching the press conference that Senator Schumer had having to do with separation of families. It actually occurred shortly before President Trump issued the executive order to stop that from happening.
Mhm.
But one of the things that he said during his remarks was there is no need for legislation. And I would respectfully disagree with the senator to say there's never been a time when there's been more of a need for legislation. If we need to clarify what the relationship toward ICE and a suspected illegal alien should be, or if we need to come up with a structure where we can more easily take in people that want to seek asylum, that want to get work visas, that possibly even want to seek citizenship, and at the same time separate out those people that want to come in for less honorable purposes, we should be talking about that.
I think what Schumer was referring to is to change the zero tolerance policy of the Trump administration, where anybody who comes to the border is detained. So that's what he was talking about. No need for legislation to fix that. There's a lot of need for legislation to fix the immigration system, to make it more humane, to make it work better for us and work better for the new immigrants.
This is what leads me to the thought that I had before. The fact that we had been relying on executive orders to enact a lot of things for a long time, and we've run into a situation where, whether you agree with it or not, you have a president now who has radically different views from his predecessor. So to say that there's no need for legislation, we can just do it by executive order, that just indicates a lack of
No,
understanding.
I don't think that is what he was referring to. Definitely need for legislation, but it was Trump's policy to have a zero tolerance on anybody crossing the border, that you're going to detain them and separate them from their children.
Well,
that is what, there's no need for legislation to stop that. That because it was his policy, and
think of it this way: if you have a law on the books
Mhm.
and you're nervous about following it to the letter or enforcing it to the letter, then that's probably a sign that the law needs to be reviewed and possibly changed.
Sure, and that certainly should be done and can be done. But in past, years, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, they did things differently. When they were at the border and did initial processing, then they would do what they call catch and release. They would have them, and then they would release them, often with an ankle bracelet or some form of monitoring, and set up a court date. You've got to appear at this date. So then they would go and they would basically take care of themselves. It wouldn't cost a tremendous amount of money. We're talking, I think, under $1 a day for that kind of system, as opposed to detaining them. The border.
Well, my only point is that if they're looking for a permanent solution to that problem, or a solution that has greater level of permanence, they shouldn't be going the route of the executive order. That might be fine in the short term. DACA was meant to be short term.
And I don't even think an executive order was needed. All he needed was to say, okay, go back to the previous policy. Didn't even need to do an executive order. That was Sessions and Trump.
A presidential order of one kind or another does not have the level of permanency that it does, that the law does. That's my only point. As I mentioned before, I think there's a compassionate case for stronger borders. I think we need stronger borders, well secured, and at the same time as many points as possible for people, if they want to request asylum, if they want to request work visas,
Sure.
or other arrangements. And we don't really have that right now. We have something that's kind of worked its way into the culture, that once they make their way into the country, that we need to treat them as anyone else that's seeking citizenship. I think that's unfair to my ancestors, to your ancestors, and that's unfair to the family members that I have right now that have arrived in this country within the past 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
They did it all right. They waited in line. They filled out the papers. They paid the fees. They learned the language.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think that would be a better way to go if there was a system in place where people had a much better chance of getting to the country to work.
Right. But everybody thinks of the wall as such a cruel thing. I don't think it. I really don't think it is. You know what's even crueler? Those few people, those relatively few people that come into the country for less than honorable purposes, they do something terrible, and it's the entire population that comes from that country that ends up being denigrated because of something like that, and that's not fair.
You could have a wall going the entire length of the border, from California to Florida. You could have a wall entirely. It's not going to stop people from coming in. I mean, I've seen videos where those with means, they drive up with a little lift, go underneath a cement wall, lift it up, and scooch a car right through.
Well, that's one case for a robust wall, but my point is more about, it'll make a clear distinction between those that want to come into the country for justifiable reasons versus those that do not want to come in for justifiable reasons. Someone that resorts to what you're talking about, I think it's safe to conclude they're probably not coming in for the right reason.
Probably they're running drugs, and or
Right.
and is a big.
And I don't think it's necessarily unfair to say that there's crime taking place across the border. There's all sorts of commerce taking place. The trick is to be as open to newcomers as we can possibly be, and at the same time, those people that have been deported, those people that are trying to conduct illegal activity across the border, are not being given the opportunity to do that. And right now, there's such a lack of cooperation in Washington, it's really doubtful that they're going to come to any kind of constructive plan on
I'm
how
afraid I
to
have
do
to
that.
agree
And
with you there.
that's a shame. And I think one of the mistakes of the last two immigration bills that were presented to Congress was it tried to handle too many issues at the same time. I think what we need to
Agreed.
do is two things. One is concentrate on greater security at the border, like I've been talking
Mhm.
all throughout the program. And number two, giving people more opportunities to come here legally.
So I think that's a great idea, doing one or two things at a time instead
Right.
of this whole big thing. But that doesn't seem to be what the Republicans or what Trump wants. Seems to want it all of it or none of it. There was a lot of hard work done by the Democrats and Republicans to come up with a bill that Trump had asked for, as far as $25 billion for his border wall and a solution for DACA and that whole package, and then wasn't interested in it. Because he's not interested in a solution, is interested in the conflict, I think. I do not think he's interested in a solution. If they were, they would do one thing at a time, like you said.
Honestly,
Why don't they?
I think both sides can be accused of that.
But
And
there was a bill there that gave him his money for his border wall, took care of DACA, which he says he wants taken care of. It was all set, and a lot of work was done, a lot of negotiating, and not everybody got what they wanted and gave in things that they didn't want. But that's what you do with negotiation. It was all set. Wasn't interested in it. So,
well, all I can say is if at first you don't succeed, try again.
well, and we've been talking about Mexico this whole time. How about the Muslims, the Muslim countries with the Muslim ban? And I think that is terrible. That there's that now the Supreme Court has upheld the Muslim ban that Trump
Okay.
has put forth.
And what do you think the motive for upholding the ban was?
Frankly, I think it's because they wanted to go along. You know what? I don't know what their motivation was. I mean, they had.
They don't have to worry about losing their positions as justices. That's the nature of the Supreme Court. So what do you think motivated
I
that?
know that they had said that previously that it did not uphold the ban, the previous bans, but since they put in some token pieces of Korea and I don't know if it was Venezuela or some.
Venezuela. Yeah, they were actually.
They had some token pieces from a couple other countries and say, oh, now it's not a Muslim ban.
Yeah.
And the problem with the Supreme Court in this case is they're not using consistent methodology with determining cases. And they use the methodology that since it does include other countries, it's not a Muslim ban. But if you take in the information that is publicly documented about what Trump has said about that it is a Muslim ban, and these are primarily Muslim countries, it is a Muslim ban. And that they're saying, well, because you've thrown these other countries, that it's not a Muslim ban. And I think that's ridiculous.
Well, the countries impacted are Venezuela, North Korea, Chad, Libya, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Somalia. Now, the common denominator amongst all those countries is that they are nations that have in the past expressed some hostility toward the U.S. or its allies.
So is Canada.
Not to the extent that these countries.
They're getting there. They're getting there the way we're treating them.
We love Canada.
Yes, we do.
We
do.
I have roots in Canada.
I have a lot of
so,
Canadian relatives.
Getting back to what I was saying
They're
before, they either have expressed some hostility or lack the internal infrastructure to provide the United States with proper information having to do with intended recipients. That's the common denominator that unites all of these. Now, the thing to understand also, if you concentrate on the Muslim majority countries only, is that we're talking about 6 countries out of 50 worldwide
Mhm.
nations that have a Muslim
So
majority
why do
too.
you?
So to say that this was a Muslim ban, at least legally speaking, is a stretch.
Well, and you know, again, he had to redo it 3 times until he got something
Right.
that would pass.
Well,
And
let me put it this way. I saw an interview with Alan Dershowitz recently, who is hardly a darling amongst Republicans and conservatives.
mhm.
And he said that as much as he opposes the move, it's legal. And there have been plenty of times in history where presidents have taken actions that were completely within their authority to do so, but we opposed. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not allowed to do that, but we're allowed to oppose them, and we're entitled to speak out about that as Americans. I think in this case, what we have are credible reasons to be concerned about these countries, about their intentions toward us, about their ability to provide information to
So
us that would be useful.
so do the proper vetting. Well, you don't need a ban. You can
Well,
just do your
that's
proper
my
vetting.
point. If you have some countries that have expressed hostility in the past toward us, I don't really get the impression that they'll be very likely to cooperate. You have to judge it as
Oh,
a freestanding document.
then why did we're tossing some stuff in here we weren't really talking about, but with the Supreme Court, with the baker who refused to bake a cake for the gay couple, he would not bake this cake. They're getting married and they wanted a cake and they wanted from this
Hmm.
baker.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court ruled that that was okay, that that baker could say because of his religion, I can discriminate against these people because they're gay. And in that case, the Supreme Court said, well, you got to look at the bigger picture. You got to look at all that was going on around it, and all you got to look at the bigger picture, and you got to take in all these factors, not just the event itself, which was discriminatory, but the things around it. Well, in that case, they're picking and choosing. In one case, they're saying with the ban, they're saying, well, this piece of paper in front of me, this law, legal. Not looking at anything else because you can't look at anything else. And then they're looking at all this other stuff that made it okay for that baker to discriminate against the gay couple who wanted to get married. So that I have a problem with the Supreme Court.
Okay.
That I have an issue with.
My personal opinion on that is we shouldn't really be denying service to anybody,
I agree.
which means this couple should have gotten their cake, which means Sarah Sanders should have had an opportunity to have dinner with her family,
Well,
which means no one should be getting in your face in the street
that
to
that is a political thing and not a it wasn't based on her size, her gender. It wasn't based on her country of origin, how she was speaking.
what I'm getting at,
It was
Jim, is
political.
we just need to be more civil
We
as a
absolutely need
people.
to
We
be,
need to
and
be more accepting.
I do
That's why
not
we're doing this. But
I do not think it was a good idea to. I think it's understandable, but I don't think it was a good idea to kick her out of the red hen.
the biggest problem right now, Jim, is that there's no one out there willing to say it stops here, except us, obviously.
Trying.
Yeah,
So
just it stops here. Now, I really honestly hope that we manage to get all this worked out. But getting back to the immigration subject,
yes,
immigration is a wonderful institution. I think it's inexorably woven into the fabric of this country. We certainly would not want to get rid of it. It's a wonderful institution. But at the same time, we need to remember that we need to do it right. And it's actually, getting back to my remarks from before, actually in the best interest of the people that want to come into this country that they do it right as well, so they get the opportunity to participate in everything that this country has to offer. And if you come in illegally, you don't get that.
and it would be great, like you said, if we had a better system to help people come into this country legally.
Trump says, I'm sure, a lot of things, but at the same time, even he has to bob down to the fact that we do have laws, we have a constitution, and to put
Well,
it back in Congress, they need to get their act together and start putting a solution together that works for
but I think you
everybody.
give him too much credit. He's only interested in the law when it might benefit him, and isn't interested in the law when he doesn't care. or
I
it wouldn't
think
benefit him.
what should happen is that the people that are interested in making the right things happen should reach out and try to form some kind of consensus. And I think it is possible. So that's my position on it, Jim. Strong
I-
borders, but at the same time, plenty of avenues for people to come in if they want to come in for the right reasons. I think an agreement is out there, and I think a deal is out there. I think it can happen, but it will only happen.
When is it going to happen?
Well, I'll give you the chance to say it this time.
When cooler heads prevail.
There you go. All right, well, I think that's about as far as we can go with this subject. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz.